So welcome, Dr. Antipas Harris. Great to have you with us, Antipas. I know we're colleagues through working through Portland Seminary, and you have been over to the UK with my students last year, and I know they've loved your input. So just getting to know you a bit, and excited to watch as you have finished your PhD and had a book published and moved on to become the dean of TD Jakes Seminary. So I'd love to know a bit about that. Could you tell us, how did that happen? How did that role come about, and what does that mean?
Oh, it's very interesting, and thank you for the question. First of all, I'm honored to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. It's such a delight. And I've told you before, you've inspired me in different ways. In fact, some of the work that I'm doing at Jake's Divinity School bears your mark. So thank you.
Stole my best ideas, yeah?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have a kindred spirit, a
Yeah.
love for theological education that's connected with the
Mhm.
local church. So I'm a strong believer in the local church and the connection between the two.
Yeah.
So, but
I was going to say, you've done a lot of study. You've got a Doctor of Ministry and a PhD,
that's
which,
right.
what kind of crazy person does something like that? I know I did.
Yeah, I know.
I don't meet many people who have. So that's a lot of study to get where you are, yeah?
Yeah, it is.
You're trying to
But
figure some stuff out for you, for the church. Is that how your journey started?
yeah, as a pastor, I was really concerned about the connectivity between the academy and the church. Here in the U.S., of course, theological education started with the church, and at one point, pastors were presidents of theological institutions. Over the years, there was a huge gap that developed between the two, where the church was primarily, has become primarily a fishing pond for theological students for the academy. But many times, once students get in the academy, they're introduced to a world of its own, and not a lot of theological insight that comes from theological academy enters back into the church. So that back and forth became very strained, and I think that theological education here is experiencing that strain right now, and neither one is profits from that strain. And so I think part of my call really is to bridge between the church, the community, and the academy. So, and I've seen myself as a bridge in some way. And I think my education helps to support that call. And I really look for students who feel called to serve the church with the theological gravitas that we discuss within the context of the academy. So when Bishop Jakes expressed the interest in starting a divinity school here in Dallas, Texas, and he called and he said, listen, I want to do this, but I would like to know if you will come and do it with me. It was a dream come true because I knew I was called to both be a pastor and to lead a theological academy. I said it many times, it made no sense because the model is not as prominent today. But when he asked me to both be the dean and president of the school and associate pastor at Potter's House, I just about fainted because I thought this is why I started the journey.
Come on, no, let's cut to it. Did you know him before he rang you?
Yes, yes. I met Bishop Jakes back in 2012.
I imagine you just sitting at home, minding your own business, and someone says,
And then,
"Hey, Jakes is on the phone."
yeah, so I met him when I was teaching full time at Regent University in Virginia Beach. He was in town for CBN to promote his one of his books, and I met him. And when I met him, I had no idea. It's amazing when you meet people, you never know
Yeah.
what that meeting could turn into. So,
Oh, wow. Oh,
from a
okay. So
moment,
it wasn't a massive, like, you weren't best friends or anything, and he remembered you, and
he remembered when he reached back out to me, invited me to speak at his conferences. I was on television with him. Then he offered to mentor me, and over the years, the relationship built, and a certain trust built. And so, yeah, when he wanted to start the school, I was so honored that he would ask me to do it.
so that's like a phone call. I bet you remember where you were, what time of day it was, what you were wearing.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
I absolutely remember.
man, awesome. Well, we've been so thrilled for you. Me personally, seeing Portland Seminary, it's just been fantastic. What a great privilege. And I know at the beginning of this, as you set things up, we're going to have some interface with my students and yours, and I'm so looking forward to learning from you and you guys. So tell me what, I'm just being really nosy. I mean, that's like president, dean, and a pastor. You got a lot going on there. What are you trying to establish and do? And in the midst of COVID, what does your life look like?
Yes, I'm considered. Yeah, I know. It's considered President Dean because I founded I'm the founding president of the organization, but then I function as Dean, as in developing the team and so forth. But eventually, we hope to separate. I hope we can separate the two, and so I could be the president. And because trying to do both, it's as you know, when you're starting a church, a school, you just become all things. So you just do everything you need to do in order to get the ball rolling. So that's the mode we're in now. But yeah, it is a lot. And with COVID-19, it was a big scare, right, for the church and also for the school. What will happen? Will people, how are we going to keep things together? And praise the Lord, God has been good. The church has not been meeting here physically at the facility, but we've been maintaining online, and we had a strong online presence already, and it's only doubled. So the e-church members, the support has been great from around the world. The school, as goes the church, so goes the school at this point, because we are being incubated by the church. So that really raised the question, will we be able to sustain our efforts? And thankfully, we have a facility that we need to put about $3 million into to get it up to par. And I asked the bishop if we can hold off on the local building and investing in the local building and just focus on online education. And this was a year ago. Thank God we did that, so that we did have a huge investment in a facility that we can't meet in. And now the tide has really turned even more so to online. So that was a good move. Praise the Lord for giving us that insight a year ago. So my team is all at home. I've on-ramped new people from home, and we're running the school from at home. And the students are, of course, online. So we're looking forward to officially launching the school this fall. We did a beta testing last year. We had about 58 students. This fall, we're on target for projections of 100 students by the fall.
Awesome. Do you know, it's so exciting thinking of the bit of church history that I do know, the idea of a seminary emerging from the context of a church engaging in the world to equip and train people, and having you there as a pastor academic in that role. Just you must pinch yourself every time you wake up in your sweet.
Yeah,
great,
real. Really.
Very, very exciting. So go and let me ask you then. In terms of vision and aspirations, what it's hard to say. I'm not asking you like how big do you want things to be and how many students. It's more what would you like to see the unique contribution of this seminary to the church that you're involved in and the wider church? Have you managed to far ahead?
Yeah, no, and thanks for the question. I put in the vision statement the word forming men and women for leadership and ministry in the church and society. The word forming, I think, is an operative word, because I drew from sort of a Catholic tradition with the word forming and formation, and think about how do you nurture the whole person to bear witness in a variety of and complex contexts. And so for me, I think Jake's Divinity School is positioning to make a global impact, both within the context of congregation life and in the larger society, as it relates to social concerns and religious diversity and other types of concern, global poverty, issues of race and racism and genderism and all types of challenges that I think that we have an opportunity to equip sort of a spirit-filled evangelical framework for ministry within the public square. I consider myself a public theologian, so I think we have to move. I think COVID teaches us that the church has left the building, And it doesn't mean we left the building to abandon the building, but we've left the building in the sense that our witness has to be stronger than our worship on Sunday morning.
Yeah. So when people think of a seminary, if they know what a seminary does, they're thinking like, oh, okay, Old Testament, New Testament, Greek, Hebrew, pastoral theology, you know, all the usual things that might happen. But what do you anticipate will be different about your seminary? I guess I'm asking you questions about the theological method, the ways that you're going to learn. You've already given us a clue with the online stuff that you're doing. What do you think will be different? You're trying to innovate, if I can use that word.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think a couple of things. I should start with the fact that Bishop Jakes is unique anyway, and his ministry is both local and global. So, and he has a theology of partnerships, one, and he's probably one of the few, or maybe the first at least, here in the U.S., prominent bishop who's also a successful movie producer, successful music producer, successful in real estate, success. I mean, everything he's been involved in, he's been good at it, not just sort of a side job. And so suddenly those two things, and also we have United Megacare, which is humanitarian arm of the church. He's built wells around the world. He has schools in different parts of the world, particularly on that continent of Africa. So all of that said lays the groundwork of uniqueness that I think we offer or will be offering as we move forward with Jake's Divinity School. And that is we are integrating sort of, this idea of spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ with the integration of marketplace ministry, which includes Hollywood and communications as an entertainment. And so we want to be able to, and business and leadership within the public square, community organizing and things like that. So theological education historically has not taken on all those different avenues. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do is create a model that, like this fall, we started a Bachelor's of Arts in business with concentration in ministry. What Divinity School does that? We have a Master's of Strategic Leadership in my previous institution. That was in the business school, not in the Divinity School. So we're putting that in the Divinity School because I think that what we have in our world is moral issues that we're calling social issues, but they're really moral issues that give rise to social expression or even political expression. So if we're talking moral as its root, there is no better place to reflect morally than within the context of Divinity School of Theological Education. So we want to be able to influence a variety of expressions in society, disciplines, from the trajectory of theological reflection.
Fantastic. Very, very exciting. All right. So let's get on to your book.
Sure.
So your book, does that come out of your PhD work in any shape?
No. I have another one coming out for my PhD work.
Oh, well, what was your PhD work then? What did you research?
I researched Pentecostal spirituality, mostly African American Pentecostal spirituality, and looking at epistemology and hermeneutics as it relates to African American spirituality. The integration of spirituality in everyday life and how that is undergirded by way of knowing and experiencing the world, and looking at it from a philosophical framework, if you will.
Great. So we're going to have 2 books soon that we can read by you. Fantastic. Yes. I'll get my students to read both. So this other book, at the moment, it seems incredibly prescient of you. Not only did you manage to avoid going into a $3 million facility, and that's worked out fantastically, it's like the Lord set you up to write a book that was just perfect for this time. Did you have any sense of that when you were putting it together? What made you write it?
Well, I started writing it before I moved to Dallas. I was in Norfolk, Virginia, and I was a founding president of the Urban Renewal Center, which is in partnership with the First Presbyterian Church of Norfolk. And we were working on the race problems, mostly coming out of 2016 when there were ironically, five police officers killed in Dallas. And it was the same week that Alton Sterling and Philando Castile were killed by police. And it just seemed like a bloody national disaster. And then out of that came a lot of concern. I sat on my floor on a that Saturday morning, and I cried real tears. And I just said, God, what is happening to our world? And what is the role of the church? And, so there was a lot of clamor nationally with the national optics. And that was Saturday, Sunday, the pastor of the Presbyterian Church scrapped the bulletin for all three services, very prominent church there in town. And he and I just had a conversation in all three services, a raw conversation about race. And a longer story shorter, he asked, I was going to leave university anyway, and he asked if they funded the Urban Renewal Center, would I lead it? And I said yes. So it was in the spirit of trying to understand the church's role in light of social issues that led me to this subject. But just before I left the university, a student had asked me, what do you say to your friends when they're leaving the church and saying that it's the white man's religion? And at first, it was of concern to me because I said, is he asking me a question to kind of throw my lecture off because he didn't read? or is this a serious question?
How does a student do that?
I know. And so I looked at the sincerity in his eyes and I thought, no, I think he's serious. And so the more I talked to him about it, the more I engaged him, the more I realized this was a real issue. And so the students in the class understood the question and gave some insight. And I started doing research that led me down the road of the chapters in the book. So yeah, the book was not in a vacuum. It was a real live conversations at the time. However, usually when there's a national mood or the news is leading the discussion down a track of emotionalism, we get all excited and want to change the world, and then when the news media moves on or the moods start to shifting, nobody's really interested in the subject. So I was still writing and researching when it seems like nobody really cared about the conversation as much as they did in 2016. So I really thought that by the time the book came out, people, and then by the time there's another crisis, the book will be somewhere shoved back in the shelf and nobody would be interested or know about it. So ironically though, it came out at the perfect horrible storm, and that is COVID-19, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery. It all just came to, and now marches and protests about policing has now shifted to what about the Confederate monuments? And then let's tear down the white pictures of Jesus. So now it's gotten in the religious context. So this book's theme has really become part of the national conversation.
Do you know, it must have been the Holy Spirit, not just because of the timing, because if I'd have known you were doing that, when I first met you, I would have said, you're doing a PhD and you're writing this other book just on the side. Why don't you do it later? I'm glad I didn't.
I know, right?
I'm glad I didn't give you that advice. The Holy Spirit had other ideas. So yeah, let's go on to the book. I mean, the title is Christianity, the White Man's Religion. So you told us what prompted that. As you did the research for that and you wrote it, what were some of the key things that you found out? What surprised you that you didn't know, and what confirmed what you already suspected, I guess?
Yeah, so I spent the first part of the book explaining the question because I thought that with an urban apologetics, which I located this book in the framework of sort of an urban apologetics. Part of my mission was to inform the church, and the title and the question could be off-putting, which is why I didn't want the title of the book to be called that. Is Christianity the White Man's Religion? Because I said nobody's going to read it because it's going to turn people off by the question. But the publisher won. They insisted that that was the title. So, which that was the theme question.
Let's assume your publisher's not listening. What did you really want to call it?
I can even remember now. I remember saying, maybe we should just say, whose religion is it, or something. Uh, so it's something that would be a little provocative, but not that provocative. And they said, no, I think this gets at what you're really trying to get at. So the first one really explains the question, because I think that in order to do an urban apologetic in this context, the church needs to be aware of the problem and why. How did we get here? With the question, and then secondly, respond to the question, right? And in a position of defending the faith, but with an open understanding of why the question, affirming the question, rather than delegitimizing the question by rushing to an answer. And but one of the things that I was pleasantly surprised about, well, one thing that confirmed was that really is a question on the street, and many African American, black and brown people are asking this question, not only in the U.S. but also in the U.K. I learned that through some of my research. It really is a prominent question there. But here's the part that surprised me: it's not just African Americans and Hispanics asking this question. This question is a symbolic or metaphorical question among white millennials, especially the ones that are progressive, because it's not for them a literal question as much as it is a provocative notion that Christianity is not for us, because for them, they're on the right side of history and Christianity is on the wrong side of history. Now, this plays out LGBTQ, it plays out in racial context and other types of, oppression of women and things like that. Now, thirdly, in my research, I discovered that today more people are reading than they did in previous generations. And we talk about the internet being an information age and all that. Reality is more millennials are reading more than previous generations. So information doesn't mean knowledge necessarily. It's just people put stuff out there and you believe it. So I discovered that many people are up late at night watching YouTube or surfing the internet and learning about history and know fragments of history, and they put together their own analysis of how things are the way they are. So there's a lot of discovery of history and how Christianity, or an expression, the dominant expression of Christianity, sponsored colonialism and racism, because they are both two sides of the same coin. And so they come up with conclusions based on history and the role that history played and how we got where we are. So it raises a lot of suspicion. It creates conspiracy theories. People have their own narrative, and it just starts getting out of hand. So this book, I think that was the first discovery. And the other part is a theological discovery, and that is that when you look closely at the Bible, 95% of the people in the Bible are people of color. And also the Bible is about expanding, the New Testament in particular, expanding the family of God to include the excluded, not to exclude the included. So that's a theological discovery that I thought that I needed to get out.
Mm. I always find it fascinating. C.S. Lewis talked about chronological snobbery. That there's just a historical naivety we have with the categories that we inhabit in life, and we look back and project them on history with no real understanding of the complexity of politics and faith and culture and daily life. So, a common one you hear in the UK, Europe is, Christianity is responsible for all wars, the wars of religion that took place in Europe. And the reality is a lot of the so-called wars of religion in Europe were more about the secularization of nations and power and economics and the misuse of Christianity in that context. But that's a complicated story to explain. It's just a lot easier to say, yeah, it's all religion's fault. Everything's done in the name of Christianity that caused all those wars. So it sounds like you did some detailed research and you found out what had a better story of what was going on. Yeah. So what are some of the highlights? I know when I do research, sometimes you find big things, that are concepts and stuff. Or other times you just find something little that you're like, I had no idea. I like the way Dr. Martin Percy you met talks about illustrative fragments. You get one small thing can just explode an understanding of so many things. Did you have any moments like that?
Yeah, well, I call them moments of revelation. So, I went to Angola, for example, during the course of the research, and I had also gone to Nigeria. And I went to the slave museums there in Nigeria, in Calabar. I was there alone. I was the only one in the little small museum. I discovered some things that I didn't know about slave history, and the the connection between slavery and faith and Christian faith, and sort of the Christian explanations or rationale for slavery. And I learned that in Nigeria the story was very different than the story in Angola, which means that in each place both Christian traditions or Christian people, professing Christian people, use different biblical narratives to affirm the activity of slavery. And for instance, in Nigeria, it was the curse of Ham, and this notion that Ham was cursed as opposed to Ham's son, Canaan. If Ham is cursed, then all of his descendants are cursed, including Cush. So the curse of Ham was that Ham was cursed and his descendants were cursed, and the redemption was through slavery. And in Angola, it was the curse of Cain, that Cain was cursed because of what he did to Abel, and he was a nomad in the land, and the African people therefore are descendants of him and bear the mark of nomads, the curse of Cain, and they are redeemed through baptism and through the export to the new world. And understanding the dynamics of the way Christianity was used to arbitrate the worst, I think, crime, at least in history, in some ways, in American history for sure, and how that ideology of the cursedness of Black people sort of is what framed the New World. So when we see things now like Black Lives Matter, it's become a cliche, but it started as a chant, which really came from the heart of the Black community in America, that Black people just don't feel like we have ever mattered in this country. We're the only ones that fight for civil rights in your own country. And so there's so many little things, from economics to education to policing to criminal justice. The list just goes on and on, that Black life has just learned to live in a context in which it really never mattered. And it is highlighted when you go to England or you go to even Nigeria or Angola, where people seem like they matter to their own country, in the sense that you have a history, you know where you came from, and some people can trace all the way back 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to up to 12, 13, 14 generations, and they know who they are, a sense of belonging. And that's not the case here in the United States for the majority of African Americans. There's some who have used Ancestry.com and figured out where they came from, but I'm just meaning in the sense of that sort of historical knowledge of who you are, and that has everything to do with how one perceives themselves and relate to the world. It has epistemological implications. So those are the things that really, I got a lot of insight about that.
Oh gosh, amazing. I could spend all afternoon talking to you. So let me ask you the question in terms of, especially when you look through history, and especially a topic like this is Christianity, the white man's religion. Who were the heroes and who were the villains? Everyone likes a good story. There's always someone that stands out as being, was white, but, paid a price and understood issues of race, and their faith was engaging. And then there's always the evil villains who you wonder if they were really Christians at all. Was it a bit like that when you were looking at at the different characters?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One character I didn't develop as much as I now wish I did was John Wesley, who came from England. John Wesley was an abolitionist, started the Methodist movement, the Wesleyan tradition. And he told Wilberforce that he wants him to finish the job, abolishing transatlantic slavery. And Wilberforce was working hard at that. That was in 1700. By the time we got to the 1800s, the next, I think, hero was Frederick Douglass, who was actually a Methodist minister. Uh, and he was a slave originally, a freed slave. He got his freedom, but he was born a slave, and it was a Methodist church that told him he was a heretic and fought against his message of liberation. It's interesting how it can start one way, and within 100 years, society had hijacked the message of liberation and abolition. Society hijacked it within the church. And you see that happening several times here in the US, whether it was the Methodist movement or whether it was the Southern Baptists broke off from the Baptists to preserve slavery, or whether it was the Pentecostal movement at Azusa Street that started out very diverse, and they boasted that the color line was washed away in the blood. But by the time we got to from 1906 to 1921, culture had hijacked the message of the church and split off Assemblies of God, and then from the Church of God in Christ, and split off the UPC from PAW. And we have this continuum of a society or a culture that hijacks the message and mission of the church. So that was really interesting to me. I took a hard look at what was going on in my research.
Awesome. So the title of your book is Christianity, the White Man's Religion. I'm assuming that the answer is not a simple yes or no. What was the answer?
Yeah, it's complex. It's complex. I think Christianity, as we may have known it, has certainly been branded by a very racist, white supremacist expression. And then when I say as we've known it, I mean specifically here in North America. Um, and while I say that as clearly as I can, I also say, and that is also complicated because Christianity is supposed to be personal and cultural, identified with culture, the culture of the people. I mean, after all, Jesus came out the 402 generations, and he tinted among us, as Eugene Peterson says in the Message Bible, John 1:14. He came and dwelt in the neighborhood. I mean, so Jesus became a Jew. So in that sense, Jesus can become white, but Jesus can also become black. So it becomes very, very complicated answer to the question. So on the one hand, I think that the faith has been abused by this monopoly of the Western world to the extent of using it to oppress, which is very consistent with sort of a Western traditional epistemology that enshrine imperialism, right? At the same time, I'm not saying that whites shouldn't have a personal Jesus or a cultural Jesus. I'm saying that Jesus, the incarnation, is an expression of the Jesus of faith that identifies with all of God's children in all of God's cultural context. So this is not an attempt to say, no, Jesus is not white, he's black. No, we're not saying that. Historical Jesus was certainly a man of color, but we don't really serve Jesus from the standpoint of his historicity necessarily. We come to faith based on what he did historically, but what Paul talks about is really the encounter of Jesus of faith on the road to Damascus, and that's our encounter. So that's why it's so complex, because I think that the New Testament is more about extending Jesus to all of God's people and not limiting Jesus to the Jewish context. And so if I now say, no, Jesus is black, so then whites should serve a black Jesus, now I'm creating the problem in a different way. The theological conundrum continues. So that's why I say it's complex.
Yeah. Yeah, I expect. Yeah, well, I know from I've had a quick read of your books, and
Yeah.
they're nuanced and sophisticated in the best way, and you do some amazing work in there to show that it's not a polemic, it's a real book to learn. So thank you for letting me tease some of that out with you. Now, I was just thinking, maybe I've just realised something. If I'm allowed to, my church tribe, Pentecost, trace themselves back as Pentecostal charismatics back to Azusa Street, a move of God. So William J. Seymour, a black man, the son of a freed slave,
Right.
is the progenitor of my version of Christianity. I've only just
Wow.
realized. I mean, I've always known that and known he's black, but there's a moment of realization. I'm like, actually, my Christianity is an inheritance from a move of God with this black African American preacher. That's yeah, you got me thinking. Thank you. So I want to Antipas, with all your experience as a pastor and your research and travel and everything that you've done, I want to lean now into a bunch of questions. This is like pastor to pastor, asking for advice and help. I know a lot of my pastor friends in my church tribe, and even my doctor of ministry students who are church leaders, having conversations. It's this fulmination of everything at the moment after the murder of George Floyd, and in the environment of COVID and all the craziness that's going on in the world. I think they, like me, are finding a few things difficult. The pressure to not say anything, or if you say anything, to get in trouble saying anything and making things worse than they are. The whole climate is so difficult. And one of the things I find challenging is I have a conviction that to think well and understand, you need to talk out loud and be inarticulate. You become articulate by making mistakes and thinking things through. And we live in a world, because of identity politics, virtue signaling, tribalism, intersectionality, and all that stuff, cancel culture, that to open your mouth is to immediately be, pilloried for the rest of your life. And I think a lot of people just stay quiet rather than being shouted down at. And they do want to talk, and they do want to learn and grow. So, and I feel that as well. The few times I've stuck my head up a bit and tried to engage in things, you get called something, accused of things, just because you're white, therefore you can't possibly understand or know. So pastor to pastor, can I ask you my questions? And as they help me, I know they'll help my other pastor friends and church community. So how much of what's going on now, when I say what's going on, I think I guess I'm asking you the question this way. George Floyd's murder was horrific, but I've seen on my news in the UK, the murder of innocent black men through acts of police brutality, and then it fades away. I mean, like you said, you start writing your book in 2016 and think this will all be, move off the news. And there is a sense, I know sociologically, COVID is this pressure cooker. And I've looked at things and thought, how much of what's happening is just because of the pressure of COVID on people? And how much is because something else has welled up that's the right time for it to, and maybe they can't be separated? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you mean how the two kind of
How are
play?
those two things going to get? Is it, you can go, this is just all COVID. People are just going crazy because it's COVID. Or actually at the other end, no, there is something seismic underneath that's built up, and COVID has just made it manifest.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, I do think that COVID in the United States has highlighted in a very subliminal way healthcare disparities along racial lines. There's been a disproportionality of deaths and sickness among African American and Hispanics, and that sort of digs at sort of the systemic racism that the Black and brown communities have been talking about for a while. that we've talked about healthcare disparities, and so that's one. So I think that's there. I think also the world reacts because we're stuck at home. People are frustrated, but they're forced to just be. And now you're watching television and you're forced to see something that many people had never seen before. Now, some had heard about things that happened, some had knew about something, but when you actually are forced to see something in real time that happens on the streets of your nation, I think all of the other subliminal pressures start to, there's a clash of all of those emotions. But I want to reiterate that I think that slowing down to see it caused a great reaction, and because I really think that a lot of the young people, I mean, I was following the Ahmaud Arbery situation in Brunswick, Georgia, before it hit national news. We know a lot about cases and situations and that happen all around the nation that never hit the news, and nobody ever really talks about it. So all of that just kind of was there as well. So, and then once it started to swell, it just started to keep swelling because there was a visual, and I know that I feel like I heard you talk about artifacts and symbols, signs. Yeah, uh, that's when I was sitting in one of your meetings where you're talking. That became an artifact in some way. It became something that when I saw it, I almost fainted. Another pastor called me and said, and I told the pastor, I said, I've seen police shoot people on video. I've seen all this stuff. I don't know why this impacted me in a visceral way and it came out of nowhere because I didn't expect it to do that. So that's why I think I understand what other people may have felt, but it became a bit of an artifact to stretch your language there a bit. But it became a visual that suddenly gave meaning to Black Lives Matter, and I think it everything else just clashed. And the young people out there, I can't believe it. It's one thing to say you're emotional, you run in the street screaming, ah, yeah. But when people are willing to go to jail, get out of jail, come back and do it again multiple times, and now we're at what number? I don't know how many days it's been. They're still protesting. There's a bit of a great awakening that happens. And I think that not only is it something to reflect on as a moral crisis, but I think it speaks to spirituality and how young people boast at being spiritual but not religious. And I think there is a genuine spirituality that is being expressed and an opportunity for the church to connect with that spirituality so a great awakening could turn into a great revival, separating the two in this context.
Mm. Thank you. So if we, press straight into my, for me personally, aware of suddenly my whiteness. And I'll be honest, Antipas, my memories of when I met you and were we in Hong Kong first time we met? Yeah, it was. And I remember my wife, she said, "Who's the snappily dressed guy?" And I went, "What do you mean the snappily dressed guy?" I was like, "Well, John from Kenya, he dresses snappy." And she says, No, the really snappily dressed guy. And she described your shoes. And I went, "Oh, it's Antipas." And you know what? Not once did she go, "The black guy who's dressed really well." And I find myself thinking, did we do that thing where you're a white person who doesn't notice that someone's black? Because our memories of you when we met you were not that you were black, but your awesome clothes that you were wearing. And you start to think, is that right? Is that wrong? And you second guess all your interactions, and that taps into the whole thing. And I know a lot of my other white friends do, of white guilt. I'm somehow responsible for everything from every previous generation of every white person, and therefore I can't say anything because if I do, I'm just going to make it, and it's that whole intersectional thing of, if you're a man, you don't understand women. If you're working class, you don't understand, other people don't understand you. That's been, I'm just being really honest, it's difficult to engage with it. So let me ask your advice. How do white people who, like you and me, are like thinking this is just an awful thing that we were confined and had to watch and sympathize and think racism is awful, How do we engage with the weight of that white guilt and white fragility other than get over ourselves? Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I think part of it is challenge. It's a challenging question to answer because
Mm,
there is no sort of African Americans or Black people. All right, first of all, African Americans have a common historical experience, so there's a common narrative there. But within the common narrative, there are all these different perspectives and levels of understanding about it and relating to it and so forth. So it's hard to speak on behalf of all, right? But then it becomes very difficult when you look at the global Black suffering, um, because now the African American narrative is part of a global Black suffering, whether it's apartheid in South Africa or even some of the slave history there in England or in the islands, so forth. So then it becomes even more complicated, right? So then even here, the Black experience US, I think the Southern Black narrative is different from the Northern Black narrative, though we have a common narrative, meta narrative, if you will. So all that to say, it's very complicated and difficult to even respond to your question, but I do think that there needs to be an understanding that you said now you suddenly become aware of your whiteness. Well, for me, I've always been aware of my Blackness, and no matter what I do, Blackness is always part of the reality. And I couldn't help but notice, even when in Hong Kong, oh, I may be the only Black advisor. It's just it's not like wrong or anything. It just you just know that's the first thing you realize, and then because it almost feels like and then for me the question becomes, okay, am I seen as a person who is included because I'm Black or because I'm really as good as the other person? So you always feel like you now have to prove that you're good as, but don't go too far because you can come off as overconfident or boastful. I mean, so you have all these things playing at one time where you're trying to, whether the people who are present, it's not saying they thought this or they said this, but when you grow up in a world where you always have to prove yourself, right? You don't show up expected to be something great. You have to prove that you're something great. And then it becomes part of I mean, your wife said snazzy a dresser, but sometimes it's like, oh, he's a real articulate Black man. Well, I mean, how else did I supposed to be? It's as if he's one of the ones who can actually speak clearly, or so it's like now you have to make sure that you are the one who so it's this sense in which, and so you all then it feels like you're a Black man in a white man's world, that in the white man or the white person or the white world, it's not individual but a world, there is a litmus test out there that is determined by a white world. In America, it's white America. So that if a white man does it, then it's okay. So then you show up saying, is the white man wearing jeans? Because if he's wearing jeans, then it's okay to wear jeans. I don't need to wear a suit. And you don't question whether he was supposed to, or it's like he set the rule by just being white because you're used to a white man's world. So they set the rules. You don't ask questions. They determine what's legit, what's not, and whether you're thinking about it as clearly as I just said it, you're always living into that because remember, they are the ones that gave us the civil rights. They are the ones that we're marching in the street saying we want justice. I mean, the question is, who are you talking to? Who are you talking to? There is this subliminal plea to the white world that we want justice. It's like, who are these people behind the curtain who you screaming to? Although we say it is governed by the people, by the people, these people don't feel like they have really any authority because they live in a world that has a structure, a social structure, that there is someone who's somewhere who's making these decisions, and we just got to scream it out in the street until they pay attention.
mm, gosh, awesome. On a personal note, Antipas, so everyone's got a backstory, haven't they? So I grew up in what you guys would call public housing. I lived next door almost to the I think it was the second mosque ever built in the UK. The school I was at until I went to high school. You know, I was the minority because I was white. All my friends were Pakistani, Bangladeshi. My memories as a kid are running in and out of their homes with different colored gods in the corner and the smell of curry, and you know, you just have friends. And it wasn't until I went to high school, which was in a nice middle class area the other side of the city that I lived in. I do remember coming home and my mother saying, what was it like? And I said, everyone's white. That's one of my earliest memories of a sense of whiteness, you know, going from that experience to this place where suddenly everybody was white. So you're really helping me already. Thank you. And I'm hearing a lot there, and you know, just I just want to tease that apart with you a little bit, because as I'm thinking this through and thinking out loud, probably very inarticulately at this point, I'm getting the sense of there is just this thing about whiteness that you have to work your way through that I'm oblivious to all the time. Because I'm a white man in a mostly white world. I live in a mostly white part of London and don't see that. And suddenly there's this conscious awareness that I want to engage in, but don't want to make a mess of it. Don't want to get it wrong. Don't want to make things worse, you know, for my friends, for my non-white friends. So can I ask you some really practical advice? Actually, no, I'm going to ask you a slightly, maybe a difficult question. Maybe it's not. Where is the church currently? If you had to pick one thing, and you know, when you say the church as a research, it drives you mad. You mean which church? Like you said, which narrative of the church are you talking about? There's lots of kinds of churches, but the church broadly, the white church, where is it complicit with some of the worst things that are happening with regards to race? Is that a fair question to ask? If there was one thing that could be different, yeah?
Yeah. All right. So, you know, as you said, there's so many branches, right? So one of the challenge here in the U.S. is, I think, the American evangelical church. American evangelical is necessary to say, because I don't think evangelicalism, particularly in Europe, necessarily has the same branding, right? So the American evangelical church here, let me be sympathetic first. It started its bootstrap with party politics as a way of thinking about how does a church bear witness in the public square. So I get that. I say that all the time. I know what the original intent was, but it's one thing to bear witness in the public square. Another thing is to get in bed with party politics. And I think what happened is there was some money exchange, some power promise exchange, whatever the case may be. And again, as I said earlier, the culture hijacked the mission of the church, because the church then is being pimped out by party politics here in the United States, evangelical church in particular. So, and when it did that, it in many ways start to sponsor racism, because instead of seeing and critiquing racism is about power and money. I mean, it wasn't that white people went to Africa and said, these people are black, so I don't like them. No, they saw an economic advantage. It was an opportunity to build a world, a nation, colonies, with the hardworking asset in Africa, and the resources underground were also attractive. So this wasn't, you know, really a black and white. It can't be reduced to a black person or white person's problem. It was a gold problem. It was a gold problem, and it was a power problem. So when you look at it that way, it plays itself out because the country was built on this power structure that was along color lines, but it wasn't because now it did morph, because there came a time when whites would shake hands with blacks and then wipe their hands as if the blackness was nasty, right? So we had that happen. So that became a reality. But I'm trying to answer your question. So my thing is that now the power and economic discussion, I think, is really at the bottom, love of money, root of all evil. So we talk about pro-life and all this stuff. At the end of the day, this is about money. This is about power. At the end of the day, that's what this is about. So I think that we have to cut to the chase and understand that this, especially power, because depending on who's in power, what kind of power I will have. And that to me trumps the pastoral concern about the everyday life of human beings. Because so then that's one. So, and I feel like I'm saying a lot of different things. But let me close it with this, my answer with this. And that is that this has played out in South Africa. It is played out in Rwanda in some ways, right? Because that whole Rwandan genocide was actually being controlled by I think it was Belgium or it was another country outside of it that was influenced the ideological framework. And the same thing here. So I think that the church has been complicit because we spend more time attacking weakness of, say, Black Lives Matter, or the critique that may be coming from, say, the LGBTQ community, rather than getting the point. And we don't get the point because we're so fixated on power instead of understanding the point. And so the people that are trying to explain the point don't matter in the first place. So then the church just doubles down on making its point rather than listening to the voices of the people in the community in the streets.
Man, that's so helpful. So again, take me as a pastor with my church, and people in my church are like, saying they want to lean into this moment and understand what's happening and make things better, because they have a faith that means they understand addressing injustice and things that are wrong in the world is something we should attend to now, not just something that happens in eternity. So distilling that down to a question, what's a good way we could explore that, and what are the kinds of things we should avoid?
Yeah, I think one, there's this temptation to want to do something to fix it, because especially now, because we can probably collectively see a problem. Even if we don't understand the problem, we know there is a problem and we want to fix it. So we want to rush to fix it. So what can I do to fix it? And I think that's a mistake, because it leads one to this sense of helplessness. Well, you haven't told me what to do, so I don't know what you want me to do. And then so people don't do anything. When the reality is, I think that Acts 2 demonstrates that it's not always what we do, it's how we listen, the gift of listening, and trying to understand. Because I think for centuries, for 400 years, the broader society has not really listened. And I think even in the Black community, we have all kinds of interactions with the problem that can convolute the explanation of the problem. You know what I mean? Like if I experience something my own personal way, and then I have this way of explaining the problem based on my own interaction with the problem, which may not represent the deeper problem. It really just tells my experience with the problem. So we need more people to speak to the actual problem that's underneath the experiences of the problem. Police brutality is a problem, but the problem is deeper than police brutality. So if we only fix policing, we haven't really fixed the problem.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but we can only talk about what we see. So we talk about experience without talking about philosophical frameworks and social constructs that undergird it. Because otherwise, we fix the police, now it's going to be something else. Because it was built on a structure. So all that to say to you, what I'm saying as a pastor, I often say we need more conversations about the problem. I think that we are all beneficiaries of the problem, or I use the word victims of the problem before, and somebody didn't like the word victim. But the point is that you as an individual, I as an individual didn't create the problem. So why should you as an individual take up on the full responsibility of fixing the problem? We both are victims of the problem because you may be privileged victim, I may be an underprivileged victim, but it's still something that was created that was way before us. Now, we do have a responsibility in response to the problem to move it toward a corrective. And I think that understanding the problem is first, because that, and then the other implications of not handling it properly is to reduce it to a foot washing ceremony or a smile or a hug. And it makes marching in the street, what we really want is somebody to wash our feet, or what we really want is somebody to give us a hug or to say they'll be my friend. See, it reduces the whole thing to these small acts of kindness, which can be an expression of white guilt, and it actually doubles down on the top-down relationship between the whites and the blacks. When that's not what we're trying to, we're not saying white people be nice to us, give me something. That's not the point.
I know you and I were laughing earlier before this recording. I interviewed another black friend, Christian leader in the UK, says, I do not need another white person to offer to wash my feet or cry on my shoulder and repent for their ancestors.
Right. Because maybe people feel fulfilled in that. But I think then we can turn this into a memorial of the day we all washed each other's feet. And then we're still missing the point, right? We're still missing the point. It's a social construct that we have to work toward overcoming, and we overcome it partly through political expression. I'm sorry, legal expressions, right? Like in Georgia, the United States, and I don't know if it's been this way in England, but in the United States, we have never had a moment where we even paused and had a Truth and Reconciliation Council like they did in South Africa, or had a moment where we tried to erase history like Germany did with the Holocaust. And we never had that moment. We had marches to change a law. And so what happens is that we still got laws on the books that are actually racist laws or don't protect the innocence of African Americans, because there's never been a moment where we actually paused and said, this country has violated in the most heinous way a whole group of its own citizens. So in Georgia, when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, and you hear on the recording that McMichael says, I killed that F and N word, which in anybody else's world, that equates what you just did to a hate crime. Well, Georgia, the mecca of KKK in the Deep South, doesn't even have a hate crime. At least they didn't when it happened. They just got one like a few weeks ago. But I'm saying after all this time, you don't have a hate crime, and I'm from Georgia, in the state of Georgia? Answer is no. You know why? Because it's never been demanded. So why in a country, you know what I'm saying? Why do you have to be demanded to erase or to protect citizens that have historically been dehumanized since the founding of the country? It's because the country never paused and lamented.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a few things there. I'm hearing in some of the answers you give me, let's work backwards. We need to lament. We need to listen. We need to go underneath however well-intentioned the emotion and the empathy to the real systemic structural issues that underpin what's really going on. And ultimately, it's about power and money at the root. I seem to remember someone warning us about that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I tell you how it plays itself out here.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to talk about reparations. Many people don't like to talk about reparations, and money is not everything. Money can't fix all the problems we have now. Money can't fix values nor spirituality. I think Scripture does teach us that it answers. Does answer problems.
Yeah.
So it's a part of a whole. But in this country, when slavery was abolished, just after Reconstruction, the new nation gave a stimulus package to the slave owners and said, you're losing your slaves, so you're going to need some money. So we need to give them all money. They saw that as necessity for the people who mattered. There was promise to support the emancipated slaves that never happened. So you got a group of people who left the plantations with nothing to fend for themselves in a world that was against them. And the Jim Crow laws, then with black code laws and all, were put in place to prohibit black people from succeeding, while there was a zero and no house and no nothing. So many of them had to go back to their plantation owners and beg for jobs. So now you're rebuilding a country while they've been freed like cutting off a hand and letting it fall on the floor. It's free to do what it wants to do, but it can't do anything. So once you set out that way, that group of people are going to all, and then when they build Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the government burned it down and never tried to rebuild it. Rosewood, they burned it down. We talk about now rioting and all. Police in the U.S. have a history of rioting black communities all throughout Jim Crow. So when we see Ahmaud Arbery, well, not Ahmaud Arbery because that was a vigilante, but George Floyd, the guy with the needle in his neck, we had a historical cultural reaction. Because while that is not in the classrooms of America, what happened in slavery and how policing started, as you know, in African epistemology, we learn from oral history. I mean, even my talking now, I give all these stories and it takes me forever to tell it because that's the way we relate to the world. So the way I related to that moment was a history of Emmett Till and others that I know about, Whitehurst in Alabama, in place that have been George Stinney, who had been attacked. And so it looked like a slave master killing its slave right in front of everybody's eyes because he wouldn't be a good N-word. That's the way it relates to our community.
Yeah. Powerful. Wow, thank you. And you know, we're both Christians and thinking of spiritual dynamics and dimensions. When I shared, you know, we're over in the UK, we're in England. Most people don't know where Minneapolis is. Apart from I tell my friend I've been there, I said it's the coldest place I've ever been on earth in the middle of the winter. I thought I was going to die. I went out of a restaurant. I'll never do this again. In Minneapolis, middle of the winter, and I had to go 2 blocks to get to my car. And I said I was walking, and someone said, I said it's only 2 blocks, no hat, no scarf or anything. They said, "Are you sure?" I got 1 block, and I thought I'm going to die. This is the coldest place I've ever been.
Oh yeah, it's cold. Yeah.
Well, you know. So anyway, all of that aside, you know, the narrative and, you know, what's it like for a bunch of English people who are very profoundly, the move and the impact here in the UK just rippled through churches and people in a way I've never seen. And I had a different story when I'm looking at it because that's not my history. As a Pentecostal charismatic, I saw a bit like, you know, I have Walter Wink in mind of the manifestation of demonic forces through institutions. And here is an institution that's supposed to protect people, the police, in a country where a man is in broad daylight, knows he's being filmed, and it felt like an intersection of power and institution and race and fallenness, like a demonic expression of the brokenness of human beings in their institutional relationships in public and faith. Not just a sociological event or a historical event. I think it had that visceral level of impact in a way that Christians that I know wouldn't be able to articulate something like that, but something inside them said, there is something about this that is more, it represents something more than just a black man being killed by a policeman. It had that level. Does that make any sense?
Oh yeah. I mean, for us, it was emblematic, I think is the word I want to use. It was a symbol of the way black people feel economically, education wise, like as if a system or a structure has its knee on the neck. And the fact that, Eric Garner had already gone through the I can't breathe. And he's saying I can't breathe. And it's like you're not listening. And so that feels like black experience in America, because most of the time black people complain or mention something. We're met with that, oh, you're complaining again, you're bringing up history, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's become like it's denigrated to a joke, an agitation to civilized society. So then you're always caught between, should I say something, should I not? If I do, it might not go well with me in the long run. So maybe I just need to get along, go along to get along for the bigger benefit that I would get out of this. But at the same time, you go to the barbershops, you go to the places where African Americans hang out, homes, on the stoop, uh, and we talk about these things. And then when you see this symbol, and I wrote an article about it in Christian Post, that's that's exactly how we've been feeling for 400 years. We can't freaking breathe. You know, we've learned to try to maintain. But when we see the distresses in communities, even down to drug infested inner cities that have only made the narrative worse in white America for the black community, but it's part of survival. The black on black crime. Anytime you have concentrated poverty, you're going to have a high chance of violence. So why do we keep saying, well, there are black people kill black people? Well, dude, let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about that. It is wrong. We need to stop it, but this is how we can stop it. If we invest more in the community, like we do the other side of town, in the schools, I mean, we still have that. Black side of town, the schools are bad. White side of town, they're good. Why is that the case? It's the same school system, because there's politics playing, and it's playing to the advantage of the white community and to the demise of the black community. And it only becomes, and it's that way the same way all around the world. It's that way all around the world, and it's like, so we don't need a smile, right? Because we smile, we're all friends, but why are they living differently than we are? And it's become part of the survival culture, where drugs and low values and things like that become is a product. It's a scientific fact. It's a product of certain ways to control a city, and we know that from the townships in South Africa to redlining in the United States. I mean, that's not difficult to discuss.
Yeah, man. Oh gosh, so many more questions I want to ask, but let me circle in with two to finish. Um, so one of the questions is going to be about pointing us towards good resources, and then let me do that, and then I'll finish with the one. So I've got a collection of resources, and with a bigger pile of books, and some of them I start to read, and I realize they are, especially as non-Christian secular books about issues of race, have either smuggled in or are very explicitly with an agenda of engendering white guilt, virtue signaling, and some pretty awful things. And then that means I then start looking through them, and it's not because I hope it's not because I'm trying to avoid things. I'm like, where is this conversation has been so constructive compared to some of the stuff I've had to read. Where is I've been reaching for and finding, black African pastors telling Christological stories about who Jesus is and what it means to be the redeemed community of God, and how that speaks to the systemic issues of racism. And and again, who am I as a white guy to say I find that inspiring? But you know what I mean? The question is, what are good resources for someone like me and my church to look at, so that we can, like we've been talking today, listen, lament, and do the work of looking under the floorboards at what is really going on.
Yeah, I think, and we're both Christians, and I believe in Christian resources, theological resources. I think though that to some degree we have limited what should be in the hands of a Christian person to theological reflections on passages of scripture and so forth. Once we have a grounding in that sort of literature, I think the next thing is to look at resources that are interdisciplinary. For example, um, I mean, we can look at Color of Compromise, but that's another resource for the church. My book is a resource for the church. It's not necessarily an exegesis or exposition of scripture, but it's a theological. It comes from a theological place. But I don't know resources in England specifically, but I can say, like for instance, here we have the New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, and I bring that up because it's talking about prison, the prison problem here in the United States. We need pastors to pick up those kind of resources, or and to even bring that in theological academy, because it needs to. We need to reflect based on real data. We reflect from the place of theological formation, so that we don't just recycle. We need to love and make sure our heart is right and so forth. Because you can have, and I'm thinking about now, I think it was one of the Niebuhr brothers who wrote the book Moral Man and Immoral Society. You can have a good heart. You can be a good moral person and play into an immoral society. And I think we have more of that than not these days, because we just simply go to church and say, listen, I don't support slavery. I believe in we all equal and we love God, and my friend is black and white, and we have dinner together with people. And all at the same time, you can benefit from a system that is actually oppressing that person outside of the religious space as it relates to jobs or housing. There are books on redlining here in the United States that many clergy are not even don't even know about. How what I just said earlier, cities were designed to push people out, and where are the landfills, and how they're separating groups of people, and how we, from theological perspective, can reach beyond sort of the religious language and the religious resources to understanding, how societies are built.
Wow. Gosh, worth the interview today just for that last bit. That is so helpful for me. So, yeah, I mean, in my context, I'll find resources, that are maybe less US centric, but there's, but let's suppose I've managed to locate some good resources for our church to use and to look at that let us listen, lament, and look underneath at what's really going on. How do we do that? How do you do that as a church? Do you just, is it preaching on Sundays? Is it reading clubs? Is it interviews with people? How does a church community do exactly what you just described that we need to do?
Yeah, I think table fellowship in the way it was in first century, for example, is useful. I don't mean like let's do lunch together. We do lunch. We say hey, and we just go our way and say we did lunch. But I mean table fellowship in the sense that we really do life together and share narratives. I mean, you said something earlier that was insightful about you. I mean, not necessarily to this conversation. You said I grew up in a neighborhood, I think Palestinians, you said, or Pakistani.
Pakistani and Bangladeshi, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so that's, oh, wow. Now I know something more about you and your background and diversity and the way you view the world and so forth. That's a valuable conversation because it helps me understand that you're not just a white man from England, right? So I'm not, and that helps me understand you in the same way that stories for me will help form you that are indirect. It has nothing to do necessarily with this conversation, but it's like, oh, now I get to know you, where you come from, and the depth of who you are and things like that. Because then it helps us to advocate for each other. And when it comes time to shaping agendas for politicians, and you're in the room and you can speak because you now have a better understanding about your sisters and brothers around the community because they've shared stories of policing and things like that. It's like we're doing a crash course now in the nation where we're sitting around sharing police stories with people and, oh, I didn't know you experienced that. We never sit down and have a table fellowship where we actually talk about life and experience. So you only have your own experience when you go to the ballot box. right? We talk about bearing one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ, but we don't carry that into how decisions are made to impact communities. So because we don't know about it. We don't need to know, but when you sit down and COVID forces you to actually look at somebody else's world and realize how differently that would have played out if you were white or if you were whatever. So I think that's critical. I think that's so critical. Um, and and I think this is everybody's problem. So this is the other reason why I don't think we need to watch feet, because it's everybody's problem. I think the awareness is not black people got a problem, but that Houston, as a movie say, Houston, we've got a problem. Yeah, so it's all of our problem, and we're all going to benefit from fixing the problem. And blacks cannot fix this problem on their own, and Americans can't fix it. I mean, when they're marching in England, that impacts our experience of a future, right? So it's global solidarity to a human problem that's playing itself out in everywhere, really. But it sparked here.
Mm.
So does that answer the question?
Oh yeah, it really does, really does.
Okay.
That's life giving and power is just yeah. So
Yeah.
so many questions I could ask. Last one then is this a double-edged, two-sided question. What gives you hope in this cultural moment for
Hmm.
change, and the obverse of that, or the flip side of it, what gives you cause for concern?
Hmm. Yeah, and I'll say it this way: both answer to both questions, and I tease it out. I see myself as standing at the intersection of pessimism and hope, not pessimism and optimism, but pessimism and hope. Um, and it's because, in some way, I've been jaded by the plea of Black America time and time again about these social issues. And I knew when George Floyd was killed, I was sitting there emotional and writing articles as part of the protest. But in the back of my mind, I was saying, this is not going to stop anything. It's going to happen again. And lo and behold, a few weeks later, Rayshard Brooks was killed. I was like, see, I knew it was going to happen again. And I'll say to you right now, it's going to happen again. So there's a certain thing about it. And when it comes to African Americans or Black people, there's always a justification for that. There's, I mean, attacking the person's character, the criminal hit. It's like you have to be perfect to be Black to even be taken seriously about these issues. It's like, no, this is a humanitarian crisis. But when you don't matter, when a whole group of people don't matter, this whole society or the systems seek to justify the action of the oppressor rather than to attend to the need of the oppressed. It's the way it's always been, and I don't see society changing itself. That's why I'm pessimistic. I'm hopeful though because of my faith. I really believe that our faith in Christ does more than internal transformation. I think that the church has got to be the headlight. And in the same way that expressions of the church did diabolical acts in the name of Christ that we all experience today, that those of us who have an authentic experience with Christ and really are for all people and not being selfish or greedy, that we really want to see the love of Christ transform society. My hope is there. I can't give up my hope in Christ, in the implications of my faith for a transformed society. I can't give that up. And I think the church has been asleep and complicit, but I also think that a revival of biblical faith and spirit filled, I'm Pentecostal at the core. I mean,
Yeah,
my dad's a Pentecostal preacher. We have that common heritage.
brother.
And I just think the spirit, I just think the spirit
Yeah,
transforms society.
yeah.
And we are called to lean into that.
Mm. Mm. Oh, that's a good place for us to finish. So, actually, is there anything you wish I had asked you, or anything you haven't shared that you wanted to share, Antipas?
Whew. We've gone on pretty deep here.
We have. I've worked you hard.
uh, yeah, I hope folks would get the book. I really hope they would.
Yeah,
And
me too. They need to buy the book. Every online
yeah,
retailer.
and I wanted to be when I wrote it with I introduced a lot of little themes
Mm,
with the goal of being a conversation starter because I saw so many places where, at least in my world, in observation and research and understanding of the church,
yeah.
we have not really brought into conversation. So I raised all these issues, knowing full well that I could go deeper into each one of them. But I chose, instead of going deeper, to just raise all these issues to start conversations
Yeah.
and see where we go from there. Yeah.
Mm. Well, thank you. And as we finish, what could we pray for you? What I mean, obviously, you told us about the seminary, but what I mean are other projects opening up as a result of this book and this time? Are you being called on?
Oh yeah. Of course, COVID challenges congregational life.
Yeah.
So, and we don't see an end to it anytime soon. Our church is much too large to risk even some of the things that the smaller churches are doing. So we don't see opening anytime in the foreseeable future. And of course, this is a decision being made, you know, in real time. So something could change, but for right now, it just seems like it's not wise. So pray for, I continue to pray for the wisdom of our bishop because he's the one to make these decisions. But I'm on the leadership team and I pray for continued wisdom as well. But more so, I pray that the Lord would grant us wisdom on how to do congregational life and to build up people. Because as you know, it's psychologically traumatizing, spiritually draining, but psychologically traumatizing to be cooped up in the house for too long when you're used to a certain rhythm of life. Uh, and so, pastoral care, what does that look like and how can you be effective? And, those things are very important to me. But also in terms of opportunities opening up for, conversations and to lead in discussions about race and the church, I pray for wisdom because these things can be, I want to be honest and contribute to the conversation, but we don't want to, historically, these conversations have turned into black people talking to black people. Over time, it just becomes black people talking to black people. Something, there's a disconnect. So I want to be a bridge builder and sustain these conversations and keep reminding people that this is not a time to attack individuals, right? This is not attacking white men or white people. That's counterproductive. We are attacking white supremacy and ideology that is present in our society, and even people who themselves are not white supremacists or racist as an individual can be moral people living in an immoral society playing into white supremacy and racism naively. So we have to open the eyes of the blind, and hopefully God will give us the wisdom to do that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Antipas, it's been a privilege to talk to you. You have helped me think out loud. I've learned some things. I'm going to be coming back and listening to this, and you've helped me as a pastor, start to think through some ways I can navigate this with my church and my other pastoral friends, and look forward to sharing this with my students too. So thank you, and may the Lord bless you with that wisdom. And all strength to you in what you're doing. Thank you. All right.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless.